A young millionaire secretly marries his black maid, but the discovery of a hidden will brings unexpected consequences. What surprising legacy will be unveiled? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. Jake Thompson stood at his study window, watching Angela tend to the garden below. The California sun cast a golden glow across the mansion's grounds, highlighting her graceful movements as she carefully pruned the roses. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, wisps escaping to frame her face as she worked. Jake noticed how she treated each plant with careful attention, checking the soil and removing dead leaves with practiced precision. He had hired many gardeners over the years, but none showed the same dedication as Angela. While others simply completed their tasks, she transformed the garden into something extraordinary. Under her care, the withered rose bushes had flourished into vibrant displays of color, and the neglected herb garden now produced fresh ingredients for the kitchen. Angela paused her work to wipe her brow, unaware of Jake's observation. He admired how she maintained her dignity and professionalism despite the heat and physical demands of her work. Unlike other staff members who complained about the California weather, Angela embraced the challenges with quiet determination. The distance between them felt both physical and social, yet Jake found himself drawn to her authentic nature. In his world of business meetings and social obligations, genuine people were rare. Angela's straightforward approach to life and work provided a refreshing contrast to the artificial personalities he encountered at charity galas and board meetings. Jake made a decision. After weeks of watching her from afar, he would take action. He instructed a chef to prepare an intimate dinner for two in the mansion's private dining room. The chef raised an eyebrow but remained discreet, having served the Thompson family long enough to know when to keep quiet. That evening, candles flickered across fine china and crystal glasses. Jake had chosen a vintage wine from a cellar, hoping to create the perfect atmosphere. When Angela arrived, still in her work clothes after he'd requested her presence, her confusion was evident. She stood uncertainly in the doorway, her practical shoes looking out of place on the Persian carpet. "Please sit down," Jake said, pulling out a chair. "I wanted to talk to you privately." Angela smoothed her work uniform and sat carefully, her posture straight and professional. "Is something wrong with the gardens, Mr. Thompson?" "The gardens are perfect, Angela. Like everything you do." Jake poured the wine, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the glass. "I've watched you work for months now, and I've come to admire not just your skills, but your character." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Mr. Thompson, I don't think—" "Jake," he corrected gently. "Please call me Jake. I know this might seem unexpected, but I've fallen in love with you, Angela. Your dedication, your integrity, the way you bring beauty to everything you touch." Angela set down her untouched wine glass. "This isn't appropriate. I'm your employee, and we come from different worlds." "I don't care about social boundaries or what others might think," Jake insisted, reaching across the table. "I care about you." Tears gathered in Angela's eyes. "You don't understand the complications this could cause. Your family, your position in society. None of that matters to me," Jake said firmly. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who care only about status and money. You're different. You're real." Their conversation lasted hours, candlelight dimming as they shared their hopes and fears. Angela gradually opened up about her own feelings, admitting she'd noticed him too, but had pushed those thoughts aside as impossible dreams. 2 weeks later, under a full moon, they met in the rose garden Angela had restored. Jake had arranged everything in secret, a local minister who could be trusted, 2 loyal servants as witnesses. Angela wore a simple white dress, carrying a bouquet of roses she had grown herself. They exchanged vows in whispered voices, promising to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The minister blessed their union, and the witnesses signed the certificate with solemn faces, understanding the gravity of their role in this secret ceremony. After the others left, Jake and Angela remained in the garden, holding each other close. The scent of roses surrounded them, and moonlight silvered the dew on the leaves. They knew their journey wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, their love felt strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "Whatever comes next," Jake promised, "we'll face it together. No matter what society thinks, no matter what my family says, you're my wife now." Angela touched his face gently. "And you're my husband. That's all that matters." They sealed their promises with a kiss, while overhead, stars witnessed their commitment. The garden that had brought them together now held the secret of their marriage, its roses standing as silent guardians of their love. Neither of them could have predicted the storms gathering on their horizon, or the shocking revelations that would test their newly made vows. For now, they were simply two people in love, determined to build a future together despite the odds stacked against them. 1 month after their secret wedding, Jake sat in his father's old study, sorting through decades of family documents. The room smelled of leather and old paper, with afternoon sunlight streaming through dusty windows. His marriage to Angela had prompted him to review his family's legal affairs, ensuring their future would be secure despite the unconventional nature of their union. Among stacks of yellowed papers and faded photographs, Jake discovered an envelope he'd never seen before. The seal bore his distant Uncle Robert Thompson's insignia, and the paper felt thick and expensive under his fingers. Inside, he found a testament dated just weeks before his uncle's death last year. The document's contents made his blood run cold. Uncle Robert, always considered the black sheep of the family, had left Jake a substantial inheritance with unusual conditions. The aging mansion in Northern California would become his, along with a significant trust fund, but only if he could uncover the truth about our family's greatest shame. Jake's hands trembled as he continued reading. Tucked behind the testament were newspaper clippings from the 1980s, describing a scandal involving the Thompson family and their household staff. The articles were deliberately vague, but they hinted at forbidden relationships and hidden children. He spread the documents across his father's mahogany desk, trying to piece together the puzzle. A photograph slipped from between the pages, showing a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Angela. The back of the photo was dated 1985 and bore a single name, Maria. Jake's research deepened as night fell. He found more photographs, letters, and diary entries, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The Thompson family had a history of falling in love with their household staff, but these relationships always ended in tragedy and scandal. The most shocking discovery came in a letter from his uncle to Jake's father. It mentioned a child born to a maid named Maria, who had worked in this very house. The letter was incomplete, but it suggested the child had been sent away to protect both families from scandal. Angela's face flashed in Jake's mind. He knew she had grown up in an orphanage until age 5, when a distant relative claimed her. The timing matched perfectly with the events described in these documents. Could it be possible? Was history repeating itself in the cruelest way? Jake poured himself a drink, his mind racing. He'd fallen in love with Angela naturally, drawn to her kind heart and genuine nature. But now he questioned everything. Was their attraction somehow influenced by blood? Had some subconscious recognition drawn them together? He thought about their wedding night in the garden, how perfect it had felt. Now that memory was tainted with doubt. Jake remembered his uncle's rare visits during his childhood, how the old man would look at him with sad, knowing eyes. Had Uncle Robert known this would happen? Was this testament his way of preventing another tragedy? Sleep eluded Jake that night. He paced the study until dawn, unable to decide what to do with this information. Angela slept peacefully in their room upstairs, unaware that their world was about to change. How could he tell her that their love might be forbidden in ways they never imagined? The weight of family history pressed down on him. Jake remembered all the times his mother had warned him about getting too close to the staff, how she'd insisted on maintaining proper boundaries. He dismissed her concerns as old-fashioned snobbery, but perhaps she'd been protecting him from this very situation. Morning light crept into the study, finding Jake still at his desk, surrounded by the ghosts of his family's past. He had to make a decision. Should he share these discoveries with Angela? Would the truth destroy their happiness? Or would hiding it only lead to more pain later? The sound of Angela moving around upstairs made his heart ache. She was probably preparing for another day in her beloved garden, unaware that their world was crumbling. Jake gathered the documents with trembling hands, knowing that whatever choice he made would change their lives forever. His uncle's words echoed in his mind, the truth about our family's greatest shame. Jake now understood the heavy burden of that phrase. He wasn't just fighting society's prejudices anymore. He was fighting against the possibility that his love for Angela might be tainted by a dark family secret. Angela noticed the change in Jake's behavior immediately. His distraction, the way he avoided her eyes across the breakfast table, the long hours he spent locked in the study, all of it set off warning bells in her mind. One morning, while cleaning near the study, she overheard him on the phone, discussing something about a testament and family records. The conversation made her uneasy. She'd grown up with enough uncertainty about her own past to recognize when someone was hiding something. That afternoon, instead of tending to the garden, Angela decided to do some investigating of her own. She started by calling Martha, her childhood friend who now worked as a librarian in the town where Angela had grown up. Martha had always been curious about Angela's background, spending countless hours helping her search for information about her biological parents. "Angela, it's been ages." Martha's warm voice brought comfort through the phone line. "How's life in the Thompson mansion? Still pruning roses for the rich and famous?" Angela twisted the phone cord around her finger, hesitating. "Martha, remember all those searches we did about my family? I need your help again. But this time, I need you to look into the Thompson family history too." Martha's typing could be heard through the phone. "The Thompsons? They've been in California society pages for generations." But there was something. Hold on. The typing stopped. "Angela, are you sitting down? I think I found something you need to see." That afternoon, Angela drove to the local library where Martha worked. Her friend had pulled microfiche records of old newspapers, focusing on the society pages from the 1980s. Together, they pored over yellowed articles and grainy photographs. "Look at this." Martha pointed to a particular article. There was a huge scandal involving the Thompsons in 1985. A maid named Maria disappeared from their household, and rumors flew about her relationship with one of the Thompson men. Angela's heart pounded as she studied the article. The timing aligned perfectly with her early childhood before she entered the orphanage. And the name, Maria, why did it feel so familiar? Martha pulled out more records. The Thompsons tried to suppress the story, but it was the talk of the town. The old guard families were scandalized. Some people said Maria had been paid to leave the country. Others claimed there was a child involved. Angela's hands shook as she examined a photograph from a Thompson family gathering. In the background, barely visible, stood a young woman who could have been her sister or her mother. The same dark hair, the same way of holding herself. "There's more," Martha said quietly. The Thompsons weren't the only family involved. There was another prominent family, the Blackwoods, who got caught up in it somehow. They disappeared from the social scene right after the scandal broke. The name Blackwood triggered something in Angela's memory. Her mysterious relative, the one who had claimed her from the orphanage, had been named Sarah Blackwood. She'd never questioned the connection before, grateful simply to have a home. "Martha, what happened to the Blackwoods?" Her friend shrugged. "They sold their properties and moved away. But rumor had it they were protecting someone, either Maria or her child." The society papers were full of speculation, but nothing was ever proven. Angela sat back, her mind spinning. Could her own past be intertwined with the Thompsons in ways she never imagined? Was this why Jake had been acting so strange lately? Did he know something about her history that she didn't? The revelation left her feeling unmoored. Her love for Jake had felt so pure, so natural. Now she wondered if there were forces at work beyond their control, ancient family rivalries and secrets pushing them together or pulling them apart. As the sun set outside the library windows, Angela made copies of everything they'd found. She needed time to process this information, to decide what to do with these new pieces of her identity puzzle. The girl who had grown up wondering about her past now faced the possibility that the answers lay within the very family she had married into. Martha squeezed her hand before she left. "Whatever you discover, Angela, remember, your past doesn't define your future. You've built a life for yourself, despite everything." Driving back to the mansion, Angela's mind raced with questions. Should she confront Jake with what she'd learned? Was he already investigating the same connections? The weight of unspoken words between them felt heavier with each passing mile. The Thompson mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing in the twilight. Somewhere inside, Jake was probably still in his study, wrestling with his own discoveries. Angela parked the car, but couldn't bring herself to go inside just yet. She walked to her garden instead, seeking comfort among the roses she'd nurtured from bare stems to blooming beauty. Here, among the flowers, she had first fallen in love with Jake. Here, they had promised to face everything together. But some secrets felt too heavy to share, too dangerous to speak aloud. As darkness fell, Angela remained in the garden, torn between the love she felt for Jake and the growing certainty that their families shared a past that could destroy their future. Jake couldn't avoid his mother forever. Victoria Thompson's weekly visits to the mansion had become a tradition over the years, and even his marriage to Angela couldn't change that. She arrived precisely at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, her silver Bentley purring up the circular driveway like a well-fed cat. Victoria swept into the mansion wearing a tailored Chanel suit and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Angela arranging flowers in the entryway. "I see you're still keeping the help clause." Darling," she said to Jake, loudly enough for Angela to hear. Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Angela is my wife, Mother. We've been over this." "Yes, your hasty decision." Victoria's lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. "That's actually why I'm here today. We need to talk privately." In his father's study, Victoria didn't bother with small talk. She pulled a familiar-looking envelope from her designer handbag, one bearing Uncle Robert's seal. Jake's stomach dropped. He'd hoped to have more time before this confrontation. "So," Victoria said, "you've seen the testament." It wasn't a question. "You knew about this?" Jake leaned forward in his chair. "About Uncle Robert's inheritance conditions?" Victoria's laugh held no warmth. "Oh, darling. I've known about Robert's little time bomb for months. I've been waiting to see if you'd stumble across it yourself." She crossed her legs, settling in like a queen on her throne. "What I want to know is how much you figured out." Jake met his mother's gaze. "I know about Maria, about the scandal in 1985, about the possibility that Angela might be related to us." Victoria cut him off. "It's more complicated than that, Jake. Much more complicated." She pulled more documents from her bag, spreading them across the desk. "Your Uncle Robert wasn't the only one keeping records." The papers revealed a web of relationships and secrets spanning decades. The Thompsons and the Blackwoods had once been close allies, their fortunes intertwined through business deals and marriages. But something had shattered that alliance in the mid-1980s. "Maria wasn't just any maid," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She was Catherine Blackwood's daughter, sent to work here as part of an arrangement between our families. When she disappeared, both families nearly destroyed each other trying to contain the scandal." Jake's head spun. But why? What was so terrible about Maria working here? Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. "Because, darling, Maria was pregnant. And the father could have been either your Uncle Robert or William Blackwood, Catherine's brother." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If Maria was Angela's mother, and if Robert was her father, that would make Angela his cousin. But if William Blackwood was the father, that's why we could never be certain, Victoria continued, watching her son's face carefully. Both men claimed responsibility. Both families tried to protect their reputations. In the end, Maria vanished, and her child. She gestured vaguely. "Well, arrangements were made." "Arrangements?" Jake's voice cracked. "You're talking about a baby, Mother. About Angela. I'm talking about protecting our family."
Victoria snapped.
"Do you think any of this was easy?" Robert nearly drank himself to death over Maria. "The Blackwoods left the country. Your father and I spent years rebuilding our social position." Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "And now history's repeating itself, isn't it? Another Thompson man falling for someone below his social class." Is that what you're worried about? Victoria's face softened unexpectedly.
No, darling.
I'm worried because you don't have all the facts. Because neither Robert nor William ever knew for certain who Maria's child belonged to. Because that uncertainty destroyed both men, and could destroy you too. The weight of these revelations pressed down on Jake's shoulders. He thought about Angela in their garden, about the love that had felt so pure and natural. Was it possible their attraction had been guided by some twisted strand of DNA, some unconscious recognition? What do you expect me to do with this information? He asked finally. Victoria stood, gathering her documents. That's not my decision to make. But remember this, sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the weight of the past is too heavy for any relationship to be R. As his mother's Bentley disappeared down the driveway, Jake remained in the study, surrounded by the ghosts of two families' mistakes. Through the window, he could see Angela in her garden, tending to her roses with the same care and dedication that had first drawn him to her. The sound of his mother's revelations echoed in his mind, mixing with Uncle Robert's cryptic testament and the growing pile of evidence that suggested his love story might be more tragic than romantic. But as he watched Angela work, Jake felt something stronger than doubt stirring in his heart, a determination to fight for their future, regardless of the past shadows. The weight of unspoken truths began to change life in the Thompson mansion. Angela noticed the whispers first, how they would stop when she entered a room, the way other staff members avoided her eyes in the hallways. Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who had once been almost motherly toward her, now watched her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. One morning, Angela overheard two maids talking in the laundry room. She must have known all along, one whispered. Getting herself married to the master like that, it's just like what her mother did. But which family does she really belong to? The other responded. Thompson or Blackwood. Either way, it's not right. Angela's hands trembled as she arranged flowers in the dining room, the conversations she wasn't supposed to hear weighing heavily on her mind. The mansion that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to be closing in around her, its walls holding too many secrets. Even her beloved garden offered little comfort. The roses she had tenderly cultivated now reminded her of her wedding night, of promises made before they knew the full complexity of their situation. She found herself working later and later into the evenings, preferring the company of plants to the uncomfortable silences that filled the house. Jake noticed her withdrawal, but seemed unable to bridge the growing distance between them. He spent more time than ever in his study, surrounded by old documents and family photographs. When they did speak, their conversations felt stilted, each afraid to voice the questions that hung between them. One particularly difficult evening, Angela found herself in the kitchen long after the other staff had gone home. She sat at the servants' table where she used to eat her meals before marrying Jake, remembering simpler times when her biggest worry was pruning schedules and fertilizer mixtures. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Jake stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, hair disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit she had once found endearing. Now it just reminded her of all the stress they were both under. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. Angela managed a weak smile. "I needed some time to think." Jake crossed the kitchen but stopped short of touching her, maintaining a distance that would have been unthinkable a few weeks ago. "I hate seeing you like this, isolated and unhappy. This isn't what I wanted for us." "What did you want, Jake?" Angela's voice cracked slightly. "A fairy tale where the gardener marries the prince and everyone lives happily ever after? Real life isn't that simple." "No." Jake moved closer, finally reaching for her hand. "I wanted you. Just you, Angela. Whatever complications our family's past might bring, that hasn't changed." Angela pulled her hand away gently. "But it has changed. Every time you look at me now, I can see the questions in your eyes. You wonder if I'm your cousin, if our love is somehow wrong. Don't deny it, I wonder the same things." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Jake sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've been trying to protect you from all this, but I'm making everything worse, aren't I?" "You can't protect me from what I already am," Angela replied. Whatever the truth about my parents might be, it's
Part of me.
I just never imagined it might be part of you too. Jake reached across the table again, and this time Angela didn't pull away. Then we'll face it together. No more secrets, no more tiptoeing around each other. Whatever the truth is, we'll deal with it. Tears spilled down Angela's cheeks. I'm scared, Jake. What if the truth destroys us? Then it destroys us, he said firmly. But hiding from it is already destroying us. I'd rather face it head-on than watch us drift apart like this. For the first time in weeks, Angela felt something like hope stirring in her chest. She squeezed Jake's hand, drawing strength from his touch. You're right. No more secrets. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, hands clasped across the old wooden table as the moon rose outside. Neither spoke of the challenges ahead or the revelations that might await them. For now, it was enough to have found each other again, to have acknowledged the fears that had been driving them apart. But even as they reconnected, both knew their journey was far from over. Somewhere in the tangle of their family's past lay answers that could either strengthen their bond or shatter it completely. The question was whether their love would be strong enough to withstand whatever truths they might uncover. Jake spent the next week poring over his uncle's testament again, this time with fresh eyes. Between the legal language and cryptic references lay something he had missed before, a potential solution to their problems. Uncle Robert had left not just the Northern California estate, but also a substantial trust fund worth millions. The conditions for accessing it were clear. Jake needed to uncover and address the family's greatest shame. Late one evening, he called Angela to his study. She found him surrounded by spreadsheets and legal documents, his excitement palpable. I think I found a way to change everything, he said, pulling her into the room. Uncle Robert's inheritance. It's not just money. It's a chance to rewrite our story. Jake outlined his plan with growing enthusiasm. They would host a grand party at the mansion, inviting all of California's most influential families. There, they would publicly acknowledge their love story and use Uncle Robert's fortune to establish a foundation promoting social equality and healing old wounds between families. Think about it, Jake said, pacing the study. We can transform this scandal into something positive. Use the money to help other couples facing similar prejudices. Show everyone that love transcends social boundaries. Angela listened quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of Uncle Robert's testament. It sounds wonderful in theory, Jake. But a party? Putting ourselves on display like that? The gossip is already bad enough. That's exactly why we need to take control of the narrative, Jake insisted. Right now, people are whispering in corners, making assumptions. If we face them head-on, with the power of Uncle Robert's fortune behind us, we can change how they see us. Angela moved to the window, looking out at her garden in the moonlight. And what about the questions about my parentage? About possible family connections? We still don't have those answers. Jake came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Maybe we don't need all the answers right away. Maybe showing the world we're not ashamed of our love is the first step toward healing these old wounds. Or maybe it's the first step toward making everything worse, Angela said softly. Have you considered that some secrets stay buried for a reason? But Jake was already deep in planning mode. He pulled out invitation designs, venue layouts, and catering menus. The party would be the social event of the season, impossible for anyone to ignore. He spoke of hiring PR consultants, making strategic donations to key charities, and ensuring press coverage that would paint their story in the most favorable light. Angela watched high and work with a mixture of love and apprehension. She recognized the determination in his eyes, the same look he'd had when he first confessed his love to her over that candlelit dinner. But this time, she sensed something else beneath his enthusiasm, a desperate need to prove something, not just to society, but to himself. Jake, she said finally, are you doing this for us, or to spite your mother? He paused in his planning, looking up at her with surprise. What do you mean? This grand gesture, this public display. It feels like you're trying to force acceptance rather than earn it. Like you're using Uncle Robert's money to buy validation. Jake's face fell slightly. Is it wrong to want to use every advantage we have to fight back against the prejudices that have kept people like us apart for generations? Angela took his hand, leading him away from the desk full of plans.
No, it's not wrong.
But maybe we need to think about this more carefully. A party isn't going to solve the real issues we're facing. Then what will? Jake asked, frustration edging his voice. Should we just keep hiding? Let the whispers and speculation continue? I can't stand seeing you isolated and unhappy anymore. Angela squeezed his hand. I appreciate that. But throwing us into the spotlight might make everything worse. What if someone at the party knows something about my parents? What if the press starts digging into our family's past? Jake pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Then we'll face it together, remember? No more secrets. Exactly, Angela said. So maybe before we invite the world to judge our relationship, we should focus on uncovering the truth ourselves. Use Uncle Robert's resources for that instead. Jake looked back at his party plans, spread across the desk like a battle strategy. You're right. I got carried away with the idea of proving everyone wrong. But we can't build our future on a foundation of unanswered questions. Angela hugged him tightly. Your heart's in the right place. You want to fight for us, and I love you for that. But let's fight smart, not just loud. As they stood together in the study, surrounded by Jake's ambitious plans, both felt the weight of the decisions ahead. The party might still happen, but first they needed to understand exactly what and who they were fighting for. Uncle Robert's fortune could indeed change their lives, but perhaps not in the way Jake had initially imagined. Despite Angela's reservations, the party proceeded as planned. The Thompson mansion blazed with light on a warm California evening, its windows gleaming like jewels against the darkening sky. Guests arrived in a parade of luxury vehicles, women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos stepping onto the red carpet Jake had insisted on rolling out. Angela watched from their bedroom window as the social elite of California gathered below. She wore a midnight blue gown that Jake had specially commissioned, its elegant lines transforming her from a gardener into a society woman, at least on the surface. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Jake appeared behind her, handsome in his tuxedo. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. No, Angela admitted honestly. But I don't think I ever will be. They descended the grand staircase together, drawing every eye in the crowded foyer. Angela felt the weight of countless judgmental stares, heard the rustle of whispered conversations. Victoria Thompson stood near the bottom of the stairs, wearing a frost-white gown and an expression to match. Jake led Angela through the crowd with practiced ease, making introductions and sharing carefully rehearsed pieces of their love story. Some guests responded with polite interest, others with barely concealed skepticism. A few older society matrons didn't bother hiding their disapproval, turning away when Jake approached. The evening progressed with the mechanical precision of a well-pee. Lawn society event. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Jake gave a speech about love transcending social boundaries, announcing the creation of the Thompson-Blackwood Foundation for Social Equality. Polite applause followed, though Angela noticed several guests exchanging meaningful glances at the mention of both family names. Then Eleanor Blackwood arrived. She hadn't been on the guest list, but no one would dare turn away the family matriarch. Her entrance caused a ripple through the crowd, conversations dying as she made her way straight toward Jake and Angela. Eleanor's steel-gray hair and aristocratic bearing commanded attention. She stopped directly in front of them, her sharp eyes moving from Jake to Angela and back again. So, she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence, you thought you could rewrite history with a party and some charitable donations? Jake stepped forward protectively. Mrs. Blackwood, we're simply trying to what? Eleanor interrupted. To brush decades of scandal under the rug? To pretend that your families haven't been locked in a dance of secrets and lies for generations? She pulled an envelope from her clutch, familiar paper with Uncle Robert's seal. Victoria Thompson pushed through the crowd. Eleanor, this isn't the time or place. When is the time, Victoria? Eleanor's voice grew louder. When these two repeat the same tragic mistakes our families made. When more lives are destroyed by our silence. The other guests pressed closer, sensing drama. Angela felt trapped, surrounded by hungry eyes and eager ears. She gripped Jake's hand tightly as Eleanor held up Uncle Robert's testament. "Your uncle wasn't the only one keeping records," Eleanor announced. "The truth about Maria, about both families, it's all here. Every detail Robert tried to hide, every secret Victoria buried." She turned to Angela. "Including who you really are, my dear." The room spun around Angela. Jake's grip on her hand tightened as Eleanor continued. "Did you really think you could start a foundation using both family names without the truth coming out? Did you imagine we'd all play along with this charade? That's enough." Jake's voice cracked like a whip. "Whatever you think you know, I know everything." Eleanor cut him off. About Robert and William's rivalry. About Maria's choice. About the real reason she disappeared. She opened the envelope slowly, drawing out the moment. "Would you like to know who your father is, Angela? Would you like to know which family truly owns your loyalty?" Victoria lunged for the papers, but Eleanor held them out of reach. The string quartet had stopped playing. Every guest stood frozen, watching the drama unfold like a society version of a Greek tragedy. "Stop." Angela's quiet voice somehow carried through the silent room. "Please, I don't want to know. Not like this. Not as some sort of public spectacle." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "My dear, these secrets have poisoned both our families for too long. The truth needs to come out." Jake moved to stand between Eleanor and Angela. "The truth? Or your version of it? How do we know those papers tell the whole story?" "They don't," came a new voice from the doorway. The crowd parted to reveal an elderly man leaning heavily on a cane, William Blackwood himself, Eleanor's brother, who hadn't been seen in public for years. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Victoria Thompson swayed slightly, reaching for support. Eleanor's hand trembled, the papers rustling. Angela felt the weight of history pressing down on them all, generations of secrets and lies culminating in this moment. William made his way slowly through the crowd, each tap of his cane on the marble floor echoing like a judge's gavel. He stopped before Jake and Angela, his weathered face lined with years of guilt and regret. "I think," he said quietly, "it's time everyone knew the whole truth. Not just what's in those papers, but what really happened the night Maria disappeared. What Robert and I did. What Victoria and Eleanor covered up." He turned to Angela, his eyes filling with tears. "What your mother sacrificed to protect you from all of us." The aftermath of William Blackwood's appearance scattered the party guests like autumn leaves in a storm. Angela fled to her garden, seeking solace among her roses while the sound of departing cars filled the night air. She sat on the stone bench where Jake had first kissed her, her expensive gown gathering dew from the grass. Inside the mansion, Jake faced down the remaining players in this family drama. Victoria Thompson sat rigidly in an armchair, her white gown like a shroud in the dimmed lighting. Eleanor Blackwood stood by the fireplace, still clutching the damning documents. William Blackwood had settled heavily into a leather chair, his cane resting across his knees. "We need to tell her everything," William insisted, his voice rough with emotion. "No more half-truths, no more protecting reputations." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Now you want honesty? After 30 years of silence." "I'm dying," William announced bluntly.
"Cancer."
"I won't see another Christmas, and I won't take these secrets to my grave." Jake felt the weight of generations of lies pressing down on him. "Then tell me everything, so I can help Angela understand." William nodded slowly. Maria wasn't just any maid, and she wasn't just Catherine's daughter. She was brilliant, educated in secret by Catherine, groomed to break free from the constraints of her social class. Both Robert and I fell in love with her mind as much as her beauty. Eleanor moved to stand behind her brother's chair. "We thought we were so progressive, encouraging Maria to better herself. We never imagined both men would pursue her, or that she would return their feelings. She loved them both," Victoria added quietly. "Different kinds of love, but genuine. When she discovered she was pregnant, She refused to name the father, said she wouldn't let her child become a pawn in our family's games. Jake paced the room, processing these revelations. So Angela could be a Thompson or a Blackwood? Angela is both, William said firmly. Maria made us promise, all of us, that her child would never have to choose between families. That's why she disappeared, why she arranged for Angela to be raised away from all of us. Outside, the garden lay silent under the stars. Jake found Angela still sitting on the stone bench, her face turned up to the night sky. Without speaking, he sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort but not touching, respecting the space she needed. I always wondered about my mother, Angela said finally. I created so many stories about her in my mind, but I never imagined anything like this. Jake struggled to find the right words. Angela, none of this changes how I feel about you, doesn't it? She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Everything's changed, Jake. Our whole relationship might be built on some twisted family connection we didn't even know about. No, Jake said firmly. Our relationship is built on love, real love, not family obligations or genetic coincidences. Angela stood, her gown rustling in the night breeze. I need time, space to process all of this. I can't stay here tonight, not with them all inside, waiting to tell me more secrets I'm not sure I want to know. Jake felt panic rising in his chest. Where will you go? Martha's offered me her guest room. I need to think. To figure out who I am when I'm not a Thompson or a Blackwood or even just a gardener who fell in love with her employer. You're my wife, Jake said desperately. That's who you are. Angela's smile held infinite sadness. Am I? Or am I your cousin? Your family's greatest shame? The living proof of a scandal that destroyed 2 families. Jake reached for her hand, but she stepped back.
Please, Jake.
Don't make this harder than it already is. I'll have Martha help me pack some things. He watched her walk away, her blue gown ghostly in the moonlight. Inside the mansion, the remaining family members waited with their heavy truths and decades of regret. Jake remained in the garden, surrounded by the roses Angela had tended with such care, feeling their world crumbling like the petals of dying flowers. The party that was meant to cement their place in society had instead torn them apart. Jake had wanted to use Uncle Robert's fortune to build a future, but the past had proved too powerful to ignore. As the night deepened around him, he realized that saving his marriage would require more than money or social acceptance. It would require finding a way to help Angela make peace with a history she had never asked to inherit. A week passed like a dream, the mansion eerily quiet without Angela's presence. Jake wandered the halls like a ghost, unable to focus on work or sleep properly. The gardens began to show signs of neglect, the roses drooping without their caretaker's loving attention. Martha called once to let him know Angela was safe but needed more time. Jake respected her wishes, though every hour of separation felt like physical pain. On the 8th day, Jake found himself in the mansion's library, a room he rarely visited. Something about the musty smell of old books and the quiet atmosphere drew him in. As he ran his fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes, a small book fell from between 2 larger ones, its pages spilling open on the floor. The handwriting on the yellowed pages stopped his heart. He recognized it from Uncle Robert's testament. But this wasn't a legal document, it was a personal diary. Jake gathered the pages with trembling hands and began to read. The diary entries dated back to 1985, chronicling Robert's growing love for Maria and his complicated friendship with William Blackwood. Robert wrote about intellectual discussions in this very library, where Maria revealed her passion for literature and philosophy. He described William's competing affections and Maria's torn loyalties. Jake lost track of time as he read, absorbed in his uncle's intimate account of that turbulent period. The sun had set when his phone buzzed with a text from Angela. I'm at our bench in the garden, if you want to talk. He found her exactly where she said she would be, sitting on their stone bench among the roses she had cultivated. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, so different from the society woman she had tried to become at the party. "I found something," Jake said softly, holding up the diary. Uncle Robert's personal account of everything that happened with Maria and William. Angela's eyes fixed on the small book. "Tell me." Jake sat beside her, opening the diary to the passages he had marked. Robert writes about falling in love with Maria's mind first, how she would discuss philosophy and literature with him in the library while dusting the shelves. William would join them sometimes, and they'd spend hours debating ideas. "My mother was educated?" Angela's voice held wonder. "Extensively, though in secret. Catherine Blackwood had arranged for her to study with private tutors, helping her work toward a college degree. Both Robert and William supported her dreams of breaking free from social constraints." Jake turned to another marked page. Robert writes here about the moment he realized William was also in love with Maria. He describes feeling torn between his friendship with William and his growing feelings for her. Angela leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. What happened? According to this, Maria loved them both in different ways. She and Robert shared an intellectual connection, a passion for ideas and social change. With William, she shared a more romantic bond, born from their secret meetings in the garden. This garden. Tears slipped down Angela's cheeks as Jake continued reading. When Maria discovered she was pregnant, she refused to choose between them. She said her child deserved freedom from the expectations and prejudices of both families. "So she left," Angela whispered. Not just left, she orchestrated her own disappearance with help from Catherine Blackwood. They arranged for her to start a new life away from both families' influence. But she made both men promise to create a trust fund for her child's future education. Angela's hands covered her mouth. The inheritance.
Yes.
Uncle Robert's fortune, it was always meant for you. Not as compensation for scandal, but as a fulfillment of a promise to your mother. She wanted you to have the opportunities she fought so hard for. Jake turned to the diary's final entry, dated just before Robert's death. He writes here about seeing you for the first time, working in the garden. He recognized Maria's spirit in you immediately, the same dedication to creating beauty, the same quiet dignity. Did he know? Angela asked. About William being my father? Jake shook his head. According to this, Maria never told anyone. She wanted you to be free to choose your own path, unburdened by paternity questions or family obligations. They sat in silence, letting the weight of these revelations settle around them. The garden where they had fallen in love had also witnessed the beginning of Maria's romance with William. The library where Jake had found the diary had been the scene of Maria's intellectual awakening with Robert. Our love story, Angela said slowly, it's not a repeat of past tragedies. It's a continuation of my mother's dream, breaking free from social constraints, choosing our own path. Jake took her hand gently. What William and Robert fought over, what tore the families apart, it wasn't just Maria's love. It was the idea that someone could transcend the boundaries society had placed on them. That's what your mother represented to both of them. Angela squeezed his hand. And that's what our marriage represents now. Not scandal or shame, but the fulfillment of my mother's hope for a world where love isn't limited by social class or family names. Jake pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of roses that always clung to her hair. Come home, he whispered. Help me use Uncle Robert's fortune the way your mother intended, to build a future where other couples like us don't have to fight so hard for acceptance. Angela looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed her mother's courage decades ago. I will, she said, but not just as your wife or Maria's daughter. I need to know that whoever my father is, whatever name I really carry, you love me for who I am. I love you for your strength, Jake said firmly, for your dedication to creating beauty in this garden, for your courage in facing down society's judgment. Just like Robert and William both loved Maria for her mind and her spirit, not her social status. The diary lay open between them, its pages containing the truth they had both sought for so long. But as they sat together in the garden Maria had once loved, they realized that the most important truth wasn't about parentage or inheritance. It was about the power of love to transcend the boundaries that society created and the courage to fight for that love, generation after generation. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Angela immersed themselves in understanding the full scope of their family history. They spent long evenings in the library where Maria had pursued her education, reading through old letters and documents that William Blackwood had finally shared with them. Each piece of correspondence, each photograph, each diary entry painted a clearer picture of the remarkable woman who had challenged the social conventions of her time. The final revelation came in an unexpected form: a war. And leather journal discovered in the back of Uncle Robert's desk drawer. Unlike his other diary, this one contained Maria's own words, entrusted to Robert before her disappearance. The journal opened with a letter addressed to her unborn child. "My dearest one," Maria had written, "by the time you read these words, you will have grown into your own person, free from the weight of family names and social expectations. I want you to understand why I chose this path, why I left behind two men I loved in different ways, and why I refuse to let anyone claim you as their own." Angela read these words aloud, her voice trembling with emotion, as Jake sat beside her in the study. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like memories given physical form. "I loved Robert Thompson for his mind," Maria's letter continued, "for the way he saw beyond social barriers to recognize the person I could become. I loved William Blackwood for his heart, for the gentle way he tended his garden and dreamed of a world where love knew no boundaries. But I loved you, my child, more than either of them. I loved you enough to give you the freedom to write your own story." The journal went on to reveal that Maria had indeed known who Angela's father was, but had taken that secret to her grave. She had made both Robert and William promise to protect her child's future, without claiming ownership of it. The trust fund they established wasn't meant as compensation for scandal, but as an investment in a future where social class would no longer determine destiny. She was building a bridge, Jake realized, not just between families but between social classes. She saw education and financial independence as tools for change. Angela closed the journal gently. "And now we have the means to continue her work. The Thompson Blackwood Foundation. It shouldn't just be about making our relationship acceptable to society. It should be about making society itself more accepting." They spent the next month reimagining the foundation's purpose. Instead of focusing on their own story, they created scholarships for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. They established mentorship programs pairing successful professionals with ambitious young people who lacked social connections. They funded educational initiatives that bridged social and economic divides. William Blackwood, in his final months, worked alongside them, sharing his business expertise and social connections. He found peace in helping to fulfill Maria's vision, even though he would never know for certain if Angela was his daughter. Victoria Thompson, seeing the positive change their work was creating, gradually softened her opposition to their marriage. Eleanor Blackwood became one of their strongest supporters, using her influence to open doors that had previously been closed to their initiatives. On a crisp December morning, exactly 1 year after their secret garden wedding, Jake and Angela hosted another gathering at the Thompson mansion. This time, there were no society photographers, no artificial attempts at gaining acceptance. Instead, they gathered with the first recipients of their foundation scholarships, young people from all walks of life who shared Maria's dream of transcending social boundaries through education and determination. In the garden where their love story had begun, where Maria had once walked with William, where generations of secrets had finally found the light, Jake and Angela renewed their vows. The ceremony was simple but profound, witnessed by a community that had been transformed by their commitment to change. "Our love story isn't just ours anymore," Angela said during the ceremony, looking out at the diverse faces of their guests. "It belongs to everyone who has ever been told that their dreams were too big, their love too unconventional, their background too humble. It belongs to my mother who had the courage to choose freedom over security, and to every person who dares to challenge the limitations society places on them." Jake squeezed her hand as he added his own vows. We stand here not as inheritors of a scandal, but as custodians of a legacy. A legacy that teaches us that true love isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. It's about recognizing the dignity and potential in every human heart. As the sun set on their celebration, painting the sky in colors that rivaled Angela's roses, the couple stood in their garden, surrounded by the beauty they had cultivated together. The question of Angela's paternity remained unanswered, but it no longer seemed important. She was, as her mother had wished, free to be herself, not a Thompson, not a Blackwood, but simply Angela, a woman who had found love strong enough to overcome generations of prejudice. The old scandal that had threatened to destroy them had instead become the foundation for meaningful change. Uncle Robert's fortune, intended to reveal the family's greatest shame, had instead revealed their greatest strength, the capacity for love to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. In the end, their story wasn't about secrets unveiled or mysteries solved. It was about the courage to question inherited prejudices, the strength to forge new paths, and the wisdom to recognize that love, in its purest form, has the power to heal wounds that span generations. Jake and Angela had not only found their own happiness, but had created a legacy that would continue to grow, like Angela's beloved roses, spreading beauty and hope in unexpected places for years to come.